On Monday, September 21st, Xbox Game Studios, Phil Spencer, and Bethesda all announced that Xbox would be acquiring Bethesda and parent company Zenimax Studios, bringing them into the Xbox Game Studios brand. It's a move that shocked a lot of people, myself included, and will undoubtedly be a major factor in how this next generation of gaming ultimately turns out. So, I just wanted to talk about that, how I personally feel about this deal, and what it could mean going forward. Now, first and foremost, when I first heard about this, the thing I was most concerned about was Deathloop, as that's probably the biggest third-party game coming out in the next generation's early life cycle that I'm particularly interested in. Sony revealed during their final press conference about the PlayStation 5, before the pre-order debacle, that it would be console exclusive to PlayStation 5. And that idea doesn't seem to mesh well with this new acquisition. Thankfully, much like what they've done with Double Fine's Psychonauts 2 set to release sometime soon, both Deathloop and Ghostwire Tokyo are now timed exclusives, with Microsoft honoring that original agreement, and Zenimax Studios themselves coming forward and adding that Elder Scrolls Online will continue to be supported on all platforms it's currently on. Now, as far as sequels to these or other Bethesda or Zenimax Studios franchises is concerned, well, that's kind of where things get a bit more murky. Ghostwire Tokyo, Deathloop, and ESO might all still be supported on PlayStation and Switch, along with any current titles released for those systems like Fallout 76 or Doom Eternal, but the future of who gets what is very much up for debate, quite literally. Phil Spencer told Bloomberg that future titles from any of these companies would be released to non-Xbox consoles and platforms on a case-by-case basis. While I personally doubt we'll see games like The Elder Scrolls 6 or Starfield not be launched to as many platforms as possible, it's not exactly out of the question either. Morrowind was a launch title for the original Xbox, and The Elder Scrolls Oblivion was originally a timed exclusive for the Xbox 360. So while its predecessor Skyrim released on basically everything under the sun when it launched and just kind of continues to do so even to this day, that's not to say Elder Scrolls 6 couldn't drop as a timed or even console exclusive for Xbox. The same could be said for Starfield. Though considering it's a new IP, there's no real precedence for that, so we'll just have to kind of wait and see. For precedence though, look at the last generation of gaming for further proof. Sony released the Crash Insane Trilogy, the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and Dragon Quest Builders as timed console exclusives for the PlayStation 4. Microsoft themselves managed to snag a few for the Xbox One, including Titanfall, Rise of the Tomb Raider, and Cuphead. And while that last one was technically just getting a wider release later on after they partnered with Nintendo, you could argue that that makes it a timed exclusive. So when it comes to keeping a franchise or two from getting to another console for a while or even at all, there doesn't really seem to be much of a precedent. It just sort of depends on who throws money where. And now I want to emphasize that I'm not saying this means we won't ever see a Bethesda game on Sony or Nintendo platforms again. On top of Microsoft's growing relationship with Nintendo, we've seen Xbox exclusive console games come to PlayStation in the past, albeit a bit later, including the first Mass Effect, Dead Rising, and more recently Cuphead. And with Phil Spencer's insistence that games will come out on a case-by-case basis, it's fair to assume that we'll see at least a few Bethesda games on other consoles. Last but not least, I think it's prudent to kind of talk about why this all could be happening. And for me, I think the most obvious reason is for them to help bolster Game Pass. Now, I'm a personal supporter of Game Pass through and through, so for me, this is just great news. I get more games for that. But I can understand why some might be hesitant about this kind of acquisition. But at the same time, Bethesda and Zenimax Studios haven't exactly been doing the best as of late. Sure, Doom Eternal was pretty successful, and as far as I know, ESO still has players dropping in with fair consistency. But just look at some of the other recent games that have dropped from these companies. Dishonored 2, while a fine game in its own right, underperformed and just didn't sell. The long-delayed Prey reboot and The Evil Within 2 both ended up being well received critically, but didn't really sell well either. And, there's that big elephant in the room with the giant 76 on it. I wouldn't go so far to say that Bethesda was on the verge of bankruptcy or closure or anything like that, but this industry does tend to have studios shutter if a game doesn't perform well. And after a few duds like this with only the occasional success, it's not surprising that they would be looking for a bit more financial stability, something that Microsoft could very easily provide and is doing for other studios like Obsidian, Double Fine, and Mojang. In general, I think this is a good move on Microsoft and Bethesda's part. While I personally prefer playing games on my PlayStation systems, I'm always happy to see developers get the support they need rather than close down for good. And as I said, I personally have Xbox Game Pass, so for me it's not really a problem if the games aren't coming to PlayStation or Nintendo anymore. But I think they will. Phil Spencer has been very vocal about wanting barriers to break between gaming companies in the last few years, partnering with Nintendo to release Cuphead and Ori and the Blind Forest to the Nintendo Switch, and to championing crossplay between consoles. And with the next generation, it looks like that trend will continue to only expand and grow. I don't know what will happen, obviously, I'm not a soothsayer or anything, but let's treat this with optimism rather than contempt, and just be satisfied in the fact that one company now owns Bethesda and Obsidian, meaning we could very well return to the Mojave in Fallout New Vegas 2. Come on, Microsoft, make it happen. You've probably already seen 1,000 posts of that on Twitter alone. It could happen.